What if the key to unlocking your own cage was hidden inside a single $20 bill, and a dog that the rest of the world had already decided was worthless? Our story begins in the oppressive silence of a small house, nestled in the forgotten foothills of the North Carolina mountains. This was Lily Albright's world, a world that had lost its color a year ago on the same foggy mountain road that had claimed her parents. Now her life was a series of quiet, empty spaces lived under the roof of her Aunt Carol, a woman so consumed by her own grief she barely noticed the small, silent girl who moved through her house like a ghost. The loudest sounds in Lily's life were the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall and the clink of her fork against a plate at dinners where no words were ever spoken. She was a burden, she knew it. An afterthought. She felt like she was living on borrowed time. And then, one sweltering afternoon, a sound cut through the silence. It was the radio left on by mistake in the kitchen, a local news bulletin that crackled with static. The county shelter was full, overcrowded, underfunded. To make space, a long list of animals deemed unadoptable were scheduled for euthanasia. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. And in that moment, something shifted inside Lily. She heard not just a news report, but an echo of her own heart, the feeling of being unwanted, of a countdown clock ticking somewhere in the dark. She didn't tell her aunt where she was going. She slipped out the back door, her sneakers silent on the dry grass, the only thing of value in her pocket, a crisp, worn $20 bill. It was the last birthday gift her father had ever given her, folded into a neat square, a tangible memory of a voice she was terrified of forgetting. The county shelter was a symphony of despair. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and fear, and 100 desperate barks echoed off the concrete walls. Lily walked past cages of pleading eyes, each one a story of betrayal. But she was looking for something else, not the loudest or the prettiest. She was looking for the quietest, for the one who had already given up. And there he was. In the very last kennel, a yellow Labrador was curled into a ball so tight he seemed to be trying to disappear into himself. His coat was dull and matted. A deep, angry gash ran along his flank, and his eyes were utterly vacant. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't even lift his head. He just shivered, a constant silent tremor. The sign on his cage was a death sentence written in cold black marker. Intake number 734, bite risk, youth, date tomorrow. Lily felt a jolt, a painful shock of recognition. He looked exactly how she felt. He's not a bite risk, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. He's just scared. The shelter manager, a man with tired, defeated eyes, just shook his head. He's been here a week, kid. Won't eat, won't look at anyone. He's broken. We don't have the resources. Lily's hand went to her pocket. She pulled out the $20 bill, its creases soft as old linen, and held it out. Please, she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it had. I'll take him. This is all I have. The man looked from the money to her determined face, and for the first time a flicker of something other than exhaustion crossed his features. He saw not just a little girl, but a fellow soul trying to pull another back from the brink. He sighed a long, heavy sound and took the bill. The paperwork will say it's an adoption fee, he said gruffly. Go on, get him out of here. Walking out of that building was like coming up for air after being held underwater. The Labrador, whose name she decided was Sully, limped beside her, a frayed rope for a leash. He still wouldn't look at her, but he followed. It was enough. For the first time in a year, Lily felt a flicker of hope. It felt like a victory, an ending to the silence. But as they reached the gate, the manager called out one last time. Hey, kid! Lily turned. Strange dog, he said, squinting. No tags when he came in, no microchip either, but he's got this weird little marking behind his ear. Looks almost like a tattoo. Never seen anything like it. Lily frowned, a knot of confusion tightening in her stomach. A tattoo. Before she could ask, the man just shrugged and turned back inside the heavy shelter door, sighing shut behind him. She didn't know it yet, standing there in the fading sunlight with a broken dog and a secret mark she couldn't comprehend, but this wasn't the happy ending she imagined. She was standing at the very beginning of a dangerous story that had started long before she was born, a story that would be told not in shouts, but in whispers. The whispers waiting for them inside her father's old workshop. The old veterinary workshop wasn't a barn, it was a sanctuary. It stood behind the main house, a world away from the sterile silence of Aunt Carol's kitchen. The moment Lily guided Sully inside, the air changed. It smelled of cedar shavings, old leather, and the faint, clean scent of the antiseptic her father used to use. It smelled like safety, like home. This was their secret, a fortress of forgotten kindness, and for the first time in a year, Lily didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a guardian. But healing is not a miracle. It is a patient, stubborn war waged against despair. For 3 days, Sully was a statue, carved from fear. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't drink. He simply lay on a pile of old blankets in the corner, his gaze fixed on a dusty wall, his body trembling with a trauma Lily couldn't possibly understand. So she waged her war with quietness. She didn't try to pet him. She didn't force him. She just existed in his space, sleeping on another pile of blankets a few feet away, her small back to him. And in the dark, she would hum the lullaby her mother used to sing, letting the gentle notes fill the space between them. On the 4th day, victory came not with a bang, but with a whisper. She left a bowl of food and turned her back, pretending to read aloud from one of her father's old textbooks on canine anatomy. The silence stretched, and then she heard it, a faint, hesitant scrape, the sound of a dry tongue lapping at water, then a soft crunching. She didn't turn around. She didn't breathe. She just kept reading, her voice steady, while tears of relief streamed down her face. It was the first plank in the bridge. The days that followed were a slow, careful dance. She would clean the infected gash on his flank, her movements gentle, her voice a low murmur. He would flinch, his muscles tense as steel, but he never growled. He just watched her with deep, intelligent amber eyes that seemed to be asking a question she couldn't answer. One night, a nightmare ripped Lily from her sleep, a familiar horror of screeching tires and shattering glass. She woke with a gasp, a sob caught in her throat, and then she felt it. A wet nose nudging her hand. She opened her eyes to see Sully standing over her, his head cocked, and then his tail, for the very first time, gave a single solid thump against the wooden floor. In that moment, the roles reversed. The patient had become the protector. With trust came proximity. One afternoon, while Sully slept with his head in her lap, she finally got a good look at the strange marking the shelter manager had mentioned. Gently, she parted the soft fur behind his ear. It wasn't a brand seared by fire, it was worse. It was a tattoo as clean and precise as a line of type of a letter, and a number sequence 734. The cold, clinical nature of it sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't the mark of a neglectful owner. This was the mark of a laboratory. The discovery propelled her into motion. She began to clean and organize the workshop, a place that had been untouched for a year. Tucked away under a dusty counter, she found it, her father's old leather vet bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Inside, beneath rolls of gauze and vials of expired medicine, was a small, leather-bound notebook. She flipped through the familiar, slanted handwriting until she reached the last entries, dated the week before the crash. Her breath caught. He wrote about consulting for a corporate research entity she'd never heard of, the Ethelred Initiative. She read on her eyes, scanning the page, until one entry seized every muscle in her body. Asset S734 displays high empathy but low compliance, her father had written. Resists conditioning protocols. Ethelred considers him a failure. I consider him a miracle. S734, the number tattooed behind Sully's ear. It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Sully wasn't a stray. He was Asset S734. The cold notes described a subject. The warm-breathing dog resting his head on her lap was a living soul. Lily finally understood the profound lesson hidden in their slow journey back to life. Trust isn't a key that opens a lock. It's a bridge built slowly, one plank at a time, over a river of fear. She had built that bridge to Sully, and now standing on the other side, she found herself staring into the abyss of a secret her parents had died to keep. Lily now knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Sully hadn't just stumbled into her life by accident. He was a message sent from a past she never knew existed, and a terrifying new thought began to dawn in the quiet of the workshop. The people who had lost him were almost certainly looking for him. For weeks, the workshop was their entire world, a secret haven sealed off from the rest of life. But secrets are fragile things, and the outside world has a way of knocking. The knock came not on the door, but in the crunch of gravel under tires. Lily peered through a grimy window pane and saw it, a gleaming black sedan, silent and predatory, parked in her driveway like a raven that had lost its way. It was the kind of car that didn't belong in her world of rust and weeds. Her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Sully beside her let out a low, guttural sound, not of aggression, but of memory. He knew. A man emerged from the car. He was tall, dressed in an expensive coat, but he moved with the weary posture of someone carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He didn't approach the main house, but walked directly, deliberately, towards the workshop, as if guided by a map only he could see. Lily's hand rested on Sully's neck, feeling the tension in his muscles. She wasn't sure if she was trying to calm him or herself. The man stopped at the door. His face was pale, his eyes deeply shadowed with a regret so profound it seemed to have carved lines into his skin. He wasn't a threat, he was a ghost. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne," he said, his voice low and raspy. His eyes weren't on Lily, but on Sully, who stood half-hidden behind her. A look of pained recognition crossed the doctor's face. "I see he found his way to you, or perhaps he was meant to." Lily's mind raced back to her father's notebook. Ethelred Initiative. "You knew my father," she stated, her voice a thin whisper. "I did," Thorne said, and the guilt in his eyes deepened. "I was a lead researcher at Ethelred, and I owe your parents the truth." And then the truth came, and it shattered the small, safe world Lily had built. Ethelred wasn't an animal welfare project. It was a private, cutting-edge genetics laboratory obsessed with creating the perfect service animal by engineering enhanced intelligence and obedience. Sully, he explained, was their most promising subject, but he was also their greatest failure. His cognitive abilities were off the charts, but so was his empathy. He would refuse any command he deemed unfair or cruel. He could not be broken. He could not be controlled. He was to a corporation built on control a worthless asset. Lily stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. "My father," she breathed. "He was their vet." "He was more than that," Thorne corrected gently. "He was their conscience. He discovered the cruelty of their methods, the psychological damage they were inflicting. He tried to stop it." Thorne paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Your mother, she was a journalist. Together, they were building a case to expose everything. They had documents, photographs, everything they needed to burn the Ethelred to the ground." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to creep up Lily's spine. "The accident," she whispered. "Doctor." Thorne finally looked her in the eyes, and she saw the terrible confirmation there. It was a foggy night on a dangerous road, Lily. No witnesses, no investigation. It wasn't an accident, it was a corporate solution. The workshop tilted, the air grew thin. The grief she had carried for a year wasn't just grief anymore, it was rage. It was injustice. Her parents hadn't been taken from her by fate. They had been murdered. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling but cold. "To warn you," he said, his voice urgent. "That tattoo behind his ear isn't just a number. It's a patented piece of biotech, a micro-locator. They decommissioned it when they sent him to be disposed of, but somehow it's come back online. They know he's alive, and they know he's in this area. They want their property back, Lily. He's living evidence of what they did." He took a step back, retreating towards the shadows. "They buried your parents' story. Don't let them bury you, too." And then he was gone. The black sedan pulled away, leaving only silence and a cloud of dust. Lily stood frozen, the terrible weight of the truth pressing down on her. Could it be real? Or was it the ramblings of a guilty man? She got her answer the next afternoon. A courier delivered a thick cream-colored envelope. Inside, on heavy cardstock, was a letter from a high-powered law firm. The language was cold, sterile, and utterly menacing. It spoke of the unlawful possession of a proprietary biological asset and demanded the immediate return of Asset S734. The letter was meant to be an ending, a final crushing move to erase a loose end. But for the daughter of Miles and Sarah Albright, it was a declaration of war. She finally understood the lesson that had been whispering in the dark corners of this new reality. A secret only has power when it's kept in the dark. The moment you drag it into the light, you steal its strength. She now had a secret that could burn worlds down. A war she had no idea how to fight until she remembered the one place in the house she hadn't dared to enter since the funeral. The place where her mother kept all her stories, the attic. The lawyer's letter was an anchor meant to drag Lily and her secret down into the silent depths of fear. But it did the opposite. It cut her loose. For the first time in a year, she climbed the rickety pull-down stairs to the attic, a place she had avoided like a tomb. The air upstairs was thick with the scent of dried memories, and dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the single beam of light from a grimy window. It was a room heavy with things left unsaid, and she was finally ready to listen. In a far corner, under a white sheet, was a trunk belonging to her mother. Taped to the top was a cardboard box labeled in her mom's neat print Mountain Folk Fair. The name was so ordinary, so wholesome, it felt like a cruel joke. What could a small-town festival have to do with a dark corporate conspiracy? Her fingers trembled as she broke the old tape. Inside, there was no prize-winning jam recipe or craft project. Inside was an arsenal. The first thing she saw was a stack of photographs. Her breath hitched. There was her father younger, smiling, his arm slung around a vibrant, healthy yellow Labrador. It was Sully. Unscarred, his coat gleaming, his eyes bright with intelligence and joy. He was playing with her father in a field of green grass, the picture of a beloved companion. It was proof that before he was Asset S734, he was a friend. Proof that he had been loved. Beneath the photos was her mother's work notebooks filled with dates, names, and observations. Snippets of conversations, timelines of cruel conditioning protocols, all the meticulous damning evidence of a journalist building an unbreakable case. And tucked at the very bottom was a thick sealed envelope. On the front, in her father's familiar slanted script, were 2 words for Lily. With shaking hands, she opened it. The letter wasn't long, but every word carried the weight of a final goodbye and a desperate hope. "My dearest Lily," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I failed. It means they silenced us, and you have found my friend. I am so sorry. I need you to know that Sully is special. They saw him as a failed experiment, but I saw him as a success of the soul. They tried to own him, to mark him with their cold science, so I gave him a mark of my own." Lily's mind flashed to the tattoo. "Look behind his ear," the letter continued. "You will not find a number. You will find a compass rose. I put it there myself, a tiny secret to remind him, and now you, that his true nature, will always point him home. They will try to erase him, Lily. They will use lawyers and threats and call him an asset. Do not fight them on their terms. That is a mistake you can't win. Instead, do what your mother and I couldn't. Don't hide him. Show them. Take him to a place where people value heart over pedigree. Make them see a soul, not a number. Let them see you." Lily folded the letter, pressing it to her chest. The path ahead was terrifying, but for the first time it was clear. Her parents had left her more than just evidence. They had left her a roadmap, a plan. The box labeled Mountain Folk Fair was never about storage. It was the destination. In that dusty attic, holding her father's last words, Lily learned the true definition of bravery. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the discovery of something more important than fear. And protecting her parents' legacy and the gentle dog now waiting for her downstairs was more important than anything. That afternoon, she walked across the overgrown lawn to her reclusive neighbor's house. Mr. Henderson was an old man of few words, a friend of her father's who had kept to himself since the accident. She didn't show him the letter or the notes. She didn't have to. She just looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. Henderson, I need to enter my dog in the Mountain Folk Fair. Can you help me?" He studied her for a long moment, his gaze seeing more than just a little girl. He saw her father's stubborn chin, her mother's determined eyes. He simply nodded. "I think we can arrange that," he said. They weren't preparing for a competition. They were preparing for a reckoning. The Ethelred Initiative had all the money and all the power. They believed they could control the story because they had 100 ways to silence a little girl. But they never accounted for a girl armed with her father's last wish, a dog with a compass for a soul and a story that simply refused to be buried. The Mountain Folk Fair was a riot of life. The air buzzed with bluegrass music and the sweet smell of funnel cake, and the show ring was a charming, chaotic parade of local pride. Farmers showed off prize-winning pumpkins. Kids walked three-legged goats, and old women displayed quilts stitched with the history of the mountains. It was a place that celebrated the authentic, the homegrown, the real. And into that celebration of community walked a quiet girl and a scarred Labrador, both of them ghosts from a world of secrets and shadows. The moment they stepped towards the amateur show ring, a hush fell over the nearby crowd. People stared. They saw the limp in Sully's walk, the old gash on his flank, the deep weariness in his eyes. They saw Lily's oversized jacket and her fierce protective grip on the rope leash. They didn't belong. And in that moment of judgment, Lily's courage began to fray. That's when he appeared, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, his polished shoes a stark insult to the dusty ground. He was the physical embodiment of the letter, his face a mask of cold corporate arrogance. He didn't wait for an introduction. He pointed a finger at Sully, his voice sharp and loud, cutting through the music. "That animal is stolen property," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "It belongs to the Ethelred Initiative, a private research firm. It is unstable, and I demand that you remove it from these grounds immediately before it poses a danger to someone." The crowd froze. The music faltered. All eyes were on Lily. This was it. The moment she was supposed to break, to run, to disappear. Her throat went dry, and the world began to shrink to a pinpoint. She could feel 100 pairs of eyes on her waiting, and then she felt a gentle, firm pressure against her leg. It was Sully leaning into her, a silent, steady anchor in a spinning world. He wasn't scared. He was with her. An old man managing the event, seeing her terror, gently pushed a microphone stand towards her. "You got something to say, little lady?" he asked, his voice kind. Lily looked from the lawyer's cruel smirk to Sully's trusting eyes, and then at the photo she clutched in her hand. She took a deep breath, and the voice that came out was not the whisper of a ghost, but the clear, steady voice of a daughter. "His name," she said into the microphone, the words echoing across the silent fairgrounds, "is Sully." She held up the photograph of her father laughing with the healthy, happy dog. "This man calls him property. My father, Dr. Miles Albright, called him a friend." She didn't stop. The words poured out of her, the story of the lab, of her parents' courage, of their fight to expose the truth. She told them everything, her voice growing stronger with every sentence. Finally, she looked directly at the lawyer. "You say he's your property, an asset, an experiment." She knelt, her hand gently parting the fur behind Sully's ear for all to see. "The Ethelred Initiative gave him a number to own him." "But my father gave him this," she said, her voice ringing with the power of an undeniable truth. "A compass rose. He put it there to show that no matter what they did to him, his soul would always know its own way home." The entire fairground was wrapped in a stunned, breathless silence. The lawyer's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then from the back of the crowd a single person began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound. Then another joined and another until a wave of thunderous applause washed over the ring. It wasn't polite clapping, it was a roar of support, of solidarity, of a community choosing a little girl's truth over a corporation's lie. The lawyer defeated turned and disappeared into the crowd. The old judge, a man with kind eyes and a face carved by time, stepped forward. "I was a veterinarian for 50 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know the difference between an animal and a soul." He looked at Lily, his eyes shining. "There's no prize here for Sully today, so we're making a new one." He turned to the crowd. "From now on, the highest honor at this fair will be the Dr. Albright Spirit Award for Courage and Companionship." The fight wasn't over. A local news reporter who had been covering the fair was already scribbling furiously in a notepad, his eyes wide. But the war for Sully's freedom and her family's honor had been won. That evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the mountain peaks, Lily and Sully walked home. The air was cool and clean, and for the first time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. She curled up with him on the porch swing, the Spirit Award ribbon clutched in her hand, and looked at the steady, gentle friend beside her. She had learned the most important lesson of all, a truth that had been waiting for her in the wreckage of her old life. Your true family is not defined by blood, but by the battles you are willing to fight for one another. They are the ones who stand with you in the arena, reminding you which way is home. Thank you for joining us for the story of Lily and Sully. Stories like this remind us that heroes are often found in the quietest places, and that the bond we share with animals can give us the strength to find our own voice. If their journey moved you, please let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, and we'd love to hear what this story meant to you. And if you believe in the power of stories that inspire, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. It's the best way to help our community grow. Of course, if you want to make sure you don't miss our next story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. For more tales of courage, hope, and the incredible connections we share, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for listening.